Greetings, this is Michael King again. I'm out on a walk, and I figured that since I did some videos on this mountain peak that did pretty well, that it might just be a tradition to do solo videos while I'm out here. So back there you can see that right there is Big Bald. So for my informal versus formal distinction video, that's where I shot it. So this right here, this is also a bald mountain, right? But it's a little bit smaller. That's just short of 6,000 feet up. This one might be about 5,400, 5,600 feet up. Maybe like a 400 to 600 foot difference. But yeah, anyways, I figure I can shoot myself while you can have a scenic view. So I've been thinking a lot about how mind control methodologies intersect with philosophy, actually. And when you look at how all these various mind control cults and constantly splintering Illuminati organizations, because the Illuminati doesn't exist, but they set in motion a methodology of constantly fracturing and competing groups that have rings and ring structures that are all the same, but they all have different mind control and criminal elements that are tailored for different demographics. And it's kind of interesting because the mind control actually goes hand in hand with obscuring criminal transactions. It's if you can control people's perception of reality, oh hey, don't look at the man behind the curtain, right? So I'm just going to give a brief meta-analysis of why these things go hand in hand, and I'm going to go over talking points and give a meta-analytical justification of them. So that's not the same thing as me going into specifics where I actually prove my case. I have some videos up that I did with Courtney Turner in my philosophy tab. I'm going to be expanding on this. So one of the reasons why I'm thinking along this line is because I'm actually prepping for another show with her where I'm going to get more into this philosophy stuff, which is relevant to a lot of things that both of us talk about. So what got me into this? What got me into this is I had two videos I posted on my account back in 2019 and later 2020 where I talked about my experience with drugs, drug-induced mysticism. I got really deep into that, only at 18 and 19. I had really profound experiences on mushrooms and stuff because it felt like I was figuring out all the secrets of the universe, because it forced my conscience and subconscious to communicate in ways they never had. So it's I don't recommend this. I recommend other means professional supervision, or maybe just spiritual practices like prayer, reading scripture in a prayerful way. I'm generally more skeptical of things like meditation, but it's if someone has ways they want to do psychedelics or meditation in a way that they say they have practical results, it's I'm not going to knock it. I'm not going to say, oh, you shouldn't do that. Who am I? Who am I to say that? But just know I'm a little skeptical of that, because I was getting into a lot of these kind of cultic ideas when I was doing that, and I was also completely unsupervised. It's I'd be getting substances where I'd make straight up ayahuasca type potions, Aztec concoctions with LSA, morning glory seeds, and I even I even end up synthesizing research chemicals and stuff. Maybe I shouldn't talk about it, but I took those videos down because it gives my enemies actually ammunition. But essentially, I was dealing with a lot of really deep questions, but I was using the wrong toolkit to address them, if that makes sense. And also, I did, since I was entertaining these cultic ideas, Kabbalistic type ideas, I ended up attracting some cult leaders, and actually at least one Jesuit. This guy's probably another one. So I was starting to get into reading the Bible. I was still doing this psychedelic guru stuff. And one of the guys I would sometimes do studies with was this Jesuit priest that would sometimes come by the campus, sometimes not. And it's I was having feedback from professors who would lean a little bit communist, a little bit neoliberal, right? And then also like online, it's like I was getting people like saying, hey, let me show you how things really work. So it's like some of these guys are straight up Nazis. So it's like I was getting people trying to like mess with my perception of reality and give me like Nazi worldviews, communist worldviews. I was interacting with a straight up Jesuit, and around the time I was like, wait a second, this is a dead end, because it's like one of the things that got me to stop is like I was astral projecting and stuff. I had a really traumatic and personal experience that I don't want to talk about, but like, don't mess that stuff. Don't mess that stuff. Like there are real risks there. There are real dangers, and if I talk about what happened, it would sound like I'm just making stuff up. It was that bad. Okay, so around that time, I stopped going to some of those Bible studies, and I was like, well, Catholicism's a dead, like I kind of figured Catholicism seems like a dead end. This mystical stuff with psychedelics seems like a dead end. So I don't know if this timing is a coincidence, but this cult leader named Martin Richling, so I think this website's deleted now, but on his page it says that his dream was once to become a Jesuit priest. And if you look up this guy on YouTube, you have people accusing him of being a Jesuit, but it's like he came in and we started interacting a little bit, and there was a time like I came to absolute epistemic despair where I couldn't have certainty about anything. So this is what intersects with mind control cults in terms of my personal experience more than anything. So for those of you who don't know, Jim Jones is actually a Jesuit at the very, like, look at before he started like having mafia bodyguards, started dressing like a mafia boss, he had the exact same Jesuit minimalistic appearance. Like you can see a lot of aesthetic similarities. And this book, Beyond Jonestown, I believe, addresses it. I got this from a couple places, but like, again, this is more meta-analysis. This isn't detailed, so I can't remember everywhere I got that from. But there is some decent documentation for like his connections to the Jesuit order. But essentially what this Martin Richling guy did is he fed Jim Jones methods of like severing you from methods to be able to know objective reality for how to relate to God personally by, there's a good bit of like emphasis on sort of external validation instead of like internal peace in your transcendent relationship with God. And what he was doing is he was essentially feeding in a Jim Jones type program into a Protestant sinless perfectionist system. So it's like he'd come out as hyper Protestant actually, but he'd be calling like literally everyone except for himself a heretic. So it's like, well, yeah, I'm for the principles of the Reformation. I'm for Scripture alone, but they missed this clause called the Establishment Commandment, and he wouldn't come out and advertise it, but it got into sinless perfectionism. So for those of you who are Protestants or Catholics listening to this, it's like both of y'all are going to be disagreeing with sinless perfectionism. It's like that's an impossible standard, but because he's not being honest about it, it's like because that's what he's selling you, but you're not thinking through all those propositions, it creates cognitive dissonance in you. It creates anxiety, fear, and he's also constantly harping on fear of hell, things like that. So it's like at this time I was actually incredibly fearful, and he was actually like saying, look, your relationship with your mom is going to send you to hell. She's lost. Like, why do you want to associate with lost people? Does she even read the King James Bible? Things like that. And he was isolating me from like pretty much like anyone I'd look up to and have deference for, except for him. Like it's pretty insane. But the point I'm making is when I talk about these mind control methods and the hierarchies involved with this, I am not just talking about things that I have read. All right, I'm talking about things that I have actually experienced and had contact with. So yeah, look at this. There's like a net over here that's for doves. There's a little tent over there. Sometimes there's people talk over there. Like, so maybe I should walk past this and be a little bit more quiet. But yeah, around the time where I had that epistemic despair, and like I was convinced that God absolutely hated me from interacting with this guy. That's when I started really thinking deeply about first principles, and this starts relating to my last video about the 30 Years' War and how that was used to throw out the scholastic methodology that I'd say the Franciscan and Dominican monks actually got down to a science. And from my Protestant perspective, I'd say Francis Turretin further perfected it, because essentially what Francis Turretin did is he took much of the logic and exegesis behind John Calvin's Institutes without a lot of his baggage, because Calvin put things in a lot of ways where it's like, okay, well, I see these pop culture representations of what he's saying, but they don't understand him. But it's like the way he words things, especially with the way the modern mind looks at words, I can see why they'd say this stuff. So he doesn't really do himself favors in a lot of ways. But Francis Turretin, he essentially takes that system but puts it through the machinery of Thomas Aquinas, actually. So I bring that up because I'm on Jesuit World Order a good bit. I interact with other Protestants, and they're like, well, look, I agree with a lot of this. It's like, look, the Franciscan and Dominican orders, like, these are spy systems. After the Praetorian Guard went away, it's like they started rebranding spy systems in a monastic order. And coincidentally, that started with around the time of Constantine, the Constantinian reforms, where they injected Mithraism into Christianity. Because I wouldn't say that like you had like the whole Romanist, Catholic power structure the way it is, or the way it became around the 600s by then. Because a lot of people say, oh, well, the institutional Catholic Church started around then. It's like, I can see maybe some of that, but don't really overstate that case. Not everything going on at the time was bad either, but you did definitely start seeing that transition around that time. So it's like, oh, well, because you got these orders over here that have agents and stuff, well, therefore the rest of it's bad, the rest of it's psyops. It's like, you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater there, right? So this might seem a little bit off topic, but it's actually related. So I don't think it's very hard to prove that English common law is good. English common law is a very good thing, and it has origins in the Crown Temple, actually. Like, a lot of it comes from Magna Carta, but there's more development going on. There's more development going on with it, so there's like multiple sources of feedback going on. But a lot of it's like hashed out by like livery fraternity people and people that are like operating in the Crown Temple. That's where parts of Magna Carta were drafted before they went over to King John. So it's like, hey, look, that's one of the main apparatuses for this global empire. It's part of a conspiracy. So, therefore, like, it's a psyop. But it's like, hold on a second. What if it's in the ruling class's best interest for whatever reason to actually get like legal codes and laws right? Like, this applies to the Catholic world too in a lot of ways. It's like, yeah, in the 1200s, for instance, you'd have a lot of corruption. It's like you can point to instances of that. And the top of the power structure back then was an esoteric cult with, the Knights Templar. I've had a good bit of content covering that, where it's like exoterically they were kind of like Christian warriors, but esoterically they were actually like closeted Gnostics, and a lot of times even like straight up practicing like Sufi mystic traditions. I mean, it's pretty wild the amount of syncretism that's been going on through all of history, because it's not really talked about. It's like when you look at it's like, oh, well, that's Catholic Europe, that's Muslim Middle East, but there's a good bit more going on there. And what I'd say was going on with the scholastics is they had it in their interest to understand human nature and theology. And also, it's like, if you look at the Franciscan Dominican orders, it's like the way it's set up with the monastic lifestyle. It's like, yeah, you can say that's good for brainwashing initiates and stuff, but you don't have to be so pessimistic about it. It's like, they're also giving up their goods and serving people. It's like you can theoretically have actual Christ-like motivations going in there. So it's like there is a conversation to be had about mind control methodologies going on, but it's like you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. All right. So how do you end up avoiding these mind control methods that are permeated through like every single level of society. Rather you turn on the TV, rather you go on the smartphone, public school, it's surrounding us. Like there's varying degrees of perception manipulation attacking us through every single facet of life. It's probably way worse than it was like even in the most corrupt era of the Catholic Church under like the Borgia papacy and later on the Medici papacy. Who you know, when he was Pope at the time where Martin Luther nailed his theses. Like I'd say right now it's actually in a lot of ways way worse than it was back then in terms of the intelligentsia. Way worse. How do you navigate all that? Well, I'd say it comes down to first principles, right? And I'd say the fundamental thing going on is people don't really have a sense of transcendence, which this becomes important. So if you look at our grammatical structure of words, if we use predicates like the grass is green, the judge is just, this is righteous, this is good, we keep on referring to things that are infinite and eternal reference points, which must be transcendent, right? But then those are related to things that are material, things that change. It's like, you know, the grass is green. It's like greenness might be an eternal standard, but the things that make greenness meaningful to us, that make the universal category, these are not eternal things. These are changing things, right? So I'd say the Franciscan Dominican monks actually had a very good way of reconciling like an ancient Greek debate between Parmenides, I believe, and Democritus. Were like, oh, like what's the ultimate reality? Is it this oneness? Is it this eternality? Or is it like, look, you have all these elements and you have all these different atoms, and because like, you know, the debate between pantheism, materialism, atheism, it goes back to like ancient Greece. So then Plato and Aristotle essentially tried reconciling those things, and I think people overstate the degree that Aristotle and Plato actually disagree with each other, because they'll say, oh, well, Plato was an idealist. He had these eternal reference points up in the world of forms, and Aristotle had them down here where he had substance tied up. He had the substance and form of a thing tied up with matter. I think people, like, if you actually look at what they're saying, they actually have a very similar metaphysical structure, and I'm going to prove that later when I go on Courtney Turner's show. But it's like, if you put too strong of a division between Plato and Aristotle, you're going to miss the point, because their main difference is, are we going to start with logical categories a priori? Or are you going to start with a posteriori, like what you can discern through experience in your senses? So it's like Plato's more starting with like ideas and logic, like conditions of intelligibility, things like that, where Aristotle's more starting with like a more scientific approach. And it's like you can reach the same conclusions that way if you accept the premise that both are valid means of learning truth, which, you know, if you start emphasizing like logic or experience over the other, it's like you end up with the same problems as Enlightenment foundationalism. So this is why I say that Protestants shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater on methodologies and conclusions developed by the Franciscan Dominican order as well. And this is why I also recommend reading Francis Turretin, because for like Protestant theology nerds, Francis Turretin shows you exactly how you can actually reconcile those things. So I actually think that the war against the scholastic Franciscan Dominicans was just as much a part of the Counter-Reformation as them going after and dumbing down Protestant theology as well. And it's pretty interesting because around this time of the Counter-Reformation, you had the Jesuit order actually setting up things like secular education, as, you know, William of Orange and the House of Nassau in the Netherlands started instituting military drill prescriptions, because, you know, all this Enlightenment philosophy actually, a lot of it was used for social engineering to bring back the whole idea of citizen soldiers, right? So it's like if your top authority is the church and things like that, because you still had that going on with the Protestant magisterial authority. It's like if you look at how the Presbyterians structured civilization, the people who had the most power and a lot of affairs were like a committee of elders, and this whole Presbyterian governing structure in a lot of ways, and also Dutch Reformed, is where we have like these committee structures in the corporate world from. There's a lot of interesting segues I can go off there, but you know, you had that being eroded with secularism also, and you can say there's some issues there, but essentially like what it did was it made the state the ultimate authority. So that's where like Enlightenment foundationalism started coming in, because it was framed like, look, this religious stuff, this dogma that comes from this scholastic method that you Protestants and Catholics are debating over, it's getting in our way of having a peaceful society. So it's like who ends up being the ultimate mediator for that? It ends up being the state, right? And like I'm not going off completely anti-Enlightenment. It's like I actually say if you follow the logic of Protestantism itself, you get the same conclusions of separation of church and state with like the whole early Presbyterian model I was talking about in some ways contradicted, and you had some issues, but it's like there are different ways of rolling that out, because the way secularism was employed, it completely dumbed down this religious infrastructure in the intelligentsia that I'd say actually accounted for differences in the transcendent and the immanent. So it's like, if for any particular issue, like there is a hierarchy of things that are more important and less important. So that goes back to what I was getting at with the difference between transcendent and immanent, difference between eternal reference points and things that are passing. It's like those levels of analysis both have their place, and in some contexts one can be more important than the other. But where wizards and alchemy and brainwashers come in is they start confusing things that should be more aesthetic, less essential. They start making aesthetics ultimate, and you really start seeing this become problematic in the age of Romanticism. So it's like Enlightenment foundationism, it was bad because it got rid of the metaphysical structure that would allow you to parse those things. But it's like they were still borrowing from the scholastic categories a good bit. It's like, if I'm going to be getting into this of Courtney Turner, but if you look at Rene Descartes, the founder of rationalism, for instance, like he's still using terms like substance and essence, and still in a lot of ways agrees with Aristotle, but he's doing it in a way to subvert Aristotelian categories of logic and try and like essentially codify Kabbalism in the first Hermetic principle as a starting point of philosophy. You know, for those of you who haven't kept up with all my stuff on that, I can actually prove that. It might it might sound far-fetched to some people, but yeah, there's quite a lot of documentation for that. So once you start making things that are aesthetic ultimate, it's like there is a whole package deal of propositions going on there that, again, if you accept the logic of it, it's going to lead you away from the truth. But if they can convince you that things that are aesthetic are the most ultimate and the most important, you don't really realize that you're already being carried away from reality, and you're already having this bifurcation of cognitive dissonance being created within your psyche that can then be exploited and create further divides between you and objective reality. So then what does that do? It makes you more dependent on whatever external source you're getting your meaning from, instead of like your own reasoning capacity, your own anchoring to reality, your own relationship with God, if you will. So if you look through Romanticism, and I'd say this is like kind of a consequence of continental philosophy, you know, because you had two things come out of Immanuel Kant. I criticize him a good bit, but not everything Kant did was bad. It's like when you look at Kant's grid of antinomies, he's right about that. He's right about his antinomies. It's where he says like these are conditions of intelligibility in the mind that you can't prove outside the mind. You can't prove this objective metaphysic structure. You just have to frame it like conditions of intelligibility for the mind to operate. It's like that's wizardry right there. trying to say like that's objective is trying to have your cake and eat it too, because it's not out there, it's in there, right? But yeah, but the analytical lens he uses isn't all incorrect. So like analytic philosophy, it's like you can still like hold to Aristotelian categories of logic there and really understand how systems work. That became more big with the American system. And I'd say after the World Wars, you have much less of that, and you have like Romanticism just completely eroding everything good about Americanism. But with the whole European continental system, it's like you have a bunch of these academics using big words and very elaborate arguments that I'm not a big fan of, like to say that things that are really not essential and not eternal are like the ultimate things, like, oh, like look at romance, like look at attraction, look at the fatherland, look at ethnicity. Like they try and make these like ultimate organizing principles, and they show, look at all the practical utility of these aesthetic concepts. Like shouldn't we structure how so much of what we do around them, where it's like what that ends up doing is that whatever those things are, I'm not even going to bother giving like a concrete example in Romanticism. It's like, for those of you who are well known with history, it's like you can probably fill in the gaps that I'm talking about pretty easily. But when it's like these non-essential things, when they end up becoming like anchors and reference points for your whole worldview, you can end up getting in quite a lot of trouble. And that's when you start getting the whole inversion of the transcendent and immanent essentially codified, right? So it's like whenever people accept ideas like this, it's like, if you look at the way our wording is structured, where it's like our grammar is obviously referring to like transcendent type reference points, you know, it doesn't cohere. But like there's different levels of contradiction and cognitive dissonance going on, okay? So what I want to do is I want to try and make these ideas that Franciscans and Dominicans hashed out, but that also Protestant scholastics, I'd say, actually improved on, easy to understand for people who are growing up in the digital age, who, because look, like, because we're downstream from the Enlightenment and later on downstream from Romanticism and downstream from the post-World War system, like our grammar and cultural way of orienting to these ideas are so discombobulated that like it's insane. Like I'm gonna have to put out like several long broadcasts with Courtney Turner and other people to actually make this point, because it's so astounding how far off like our basic conceptions of reality are from like actually reality. It's so insane and mind-blowing. But like whenever people want to start looking into philosophy, it's like they see all these big words, they see all this like frivolous debate into metaphysics and stuff. And I get that. It's like, as much as I defend the Franciscans and Dominicans, it's like they had genius. Like, by the way, like Roger Bacon, if you want to know an example of how genius people were back then, it's like Roger Bacon foresaw a combustion engine back in the 1200s, and he was associated with Thomas Aquinas too. Like, isn't that insane? Like the way he worded it was, one day people will be able to utilize explosions to not have like an explosion that causes destruction, but for propulsion. So like that's essentially a combustion engine, where it's like the explosion is channeled into momentum. So it's like he didn't exactly describe cars, but he came pretty close to it. Like these people back then were not stupid. It's like, yeah, like you have like this meme logic where it's like, oh yeah, well those monks back then, they were debating how many angels can dance in the needle of a pen. It's like, yeah, you'd have some frigid speculations like that. And the kind of Protestant scholastics who I defer to, and even some of the Catholic ones, they criticize that too. So it's like people will use these cartoon caricatures to just throw that out and then look like they're using Latin words. It's hard to understand. People will just think, well, it must not be important. But like, if you can, it's possible to salvage all that stuff and put it in our own context in a way that's easy to understand. So it's like, I don't really have much of an audience or anything, but you know, I talk to people who have much bigger audiences, and I'm Gen Z. Even though I have gray hairs, that's from me getting off Klonopin when I had akathisia for 2 months. Like I'd be lucky to get out. I'd be lucky to like get 2 hours of sleep back then. So it's like, yeah, like I started getting gray hairs at 25 because of that withdrawal syndrome. Like that was benzodiazepine withdrawal can kill you. So that's another subject. But it's like, I think that with my whole background experience with like all these cults and all this like this epistemic despair that I had to work through, but also coming from a generation that's like more psyop than anyone at any time. It's like I actually think I've put together something that can work and simplify that, but it's like it still takes work on the part of people interested in that. But seriously, it's like just getting the basics down. Just getting the basics down. Where like what's relevant to methodologies involving observation, what's relevant with orienting the transcendent categories and being able to make out like which categories most. Just getting that down, like it makes you pretty much immune to like all these MK Ultra things that are injected in all of our smartphones. Like, I'm not saying I'm perfect and don't fall for stuff. It's like I still do. It's like to be human is to err, but I have deliberately, I can like control my feed to show me what I want and like not get fazed by it, not get influenced by it. It's like I see all this like Templar BS, all these like Nick Fuentes memes I criticize. It's because like I literally posted to show you guys like, hey, look, this is how all these psyops work. Like, isn't this ridiculous? And yeah, like it is possible to overcome this. And you don't have to like learn all these Latin words and read all these theologians, but like, I would say that actually does help and go a long way. But it just depends on the level of commitment you want to give it, and if you think that's useful information. But anyways, I'm obviously putting this out because I think that's useful, and I think working out this framing devices can be useful to other people too. So it's like, that's what I'm going to be working on, and that's essentially my justification. So yeah, the almost sunset here. Think it's a good time to call it quits. And if you listen to the end, thank you.